Before we start this week's podcast, I'd like to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, PensionBee. Now, PensionBee is one of the UK's leading online pension providers that helps consumers combine, contribute and withdraw from their pensions, all through the PensionBee web and mobile app. Now, you can sign up with the names of your old employers or providers in just 5 minutes, and PensionBee will help you find, transfer and combine your old forgotten about pension pots into a low-cost online pension plan. Now, these are managed by the likes of BlackRock, State Street Global Advisors, Legal & General or HSBC. Now, they have over 250,000 customers that have already signed up to combine their pensions with PensionBee, combining close to £1 billion into their plans. You can also find out more information about PensionBee at pensionbee.com, and as always with investments, your capital is at risk.
Hello and welcome to episode 256 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fate, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how you doing?
I'm good. Well, I suppose we should start this podcast by patting ourselves on the back. Just as you introduced it, I suddenly remembered that I tweeted about Apple and their podcast app. Do you remember this week, if you haven't been following me on Twitter or the other social media platforms, I think we put it out on Instagram, that Apple have a podcast app and they actually curate podcasts in there. Now, there are charts, so you can go and find the best business podcasts if you like, or best investing podcasts. You'll find us there regularly riding high in the charts. But they also had a section in their podcast app where they had curated apps. You'd go in their podcast app, go into browse.
It's called Be a Better You.
And you scroll down, and one of the curated lists or section was called Be a Better You, as Andy just said. And when you went in there were different things. It could be a better cook, be a better something. One of them was be better reader. It was talking about different things to do with fiction. And one of them was be better with money. And they picked out the list of a very short list of podcasts, and we were at the front of that queue. So somebody pointed out to us. So that was fantastic. I know we get all the great reviews and feedback from you guys out there and our Facebook group, etc., but it was lovely to see something that has obviously been manually curated by the powers that be at Apple, and we were picked out as the lead on the Be Better with Money on the Apple podcast app. So pat ourselves on the back. I think we did a clapping sound effect. I think we put that in there, but that was brilliant. So please do keep giving us reviews. It obviously helps us. We've had a wave of them in the last 2 weeks. I think the mug offer obviously helped. If you've given us a review and not claimed your mug by emailing lauren@moneytothemasses.com, then please do so. We've already sent out a load of the mugs to people who did leave us reviews, and we will come back and read out some of those on future podcasts. But as we start 2020, it's been a great time for the podcast. We've just finishing our best ever month of downloads on the podcast. Same for the website. Everything has been going great guns, and a lot of content we're producing. So yeah, I'm really happy, Andy.
Yeah, thanks to all you guys that listen as well and share, because we get alerted from you guys that you're sharing the podcast and sharing the love. So thanks for that. What have we got coming up on today's show?
So on today's show, we've got a listener-inspired piece about leaseholds. So a checklist for a leasehold. If you're buying a property, you can buy a property freehold or you can buy it leasehold. And there's been a lot of bad press surrounding leasehold properties. Now, the other piece is going to be around going freelance. Now, there's a lot of people, especially at this time of the year, look at their careers and decide, you know what, I want to go freelance in my career and what they're doing. And there are a lot of things people don't think about. So it ties in nicely with the tax return deadline. So that, by the time you're listening to this podcast, has just passed. But all those freelancers out there, people who've gone self-employed, are going to have to fill in their tax returns. They did fill in their tax returns for Friday, the 31st of January this year. But it's timely because they had to do it. If you're thinking of going freelance, it's something you're going to have to consider. And there are lots of things people don't tell you about when it comes to going freelance and what you need to do in terms of accounting. So we're going to talk about that to inspire people who are going to go freelance this year. And finally, the last piece is about holidays. It's particularly about flying and Avios points. And so Jordan, who was at our event back in the autumn of 2019, loves a bit of money saving, and we've got him to do another piece and a bit of research for Money to the Masses regarding Avios points, and in particular relating to a credit card that's got a B8 with British Airways on it. Is that right?
Yeah, what's super exciting, it means you can fly business class very cheaply, or certainly for a massive discount. So listen out for that.
So basically for the price, I'll give you a sneak peek, a bit of premium economy. So it's worth listening to. I was impressed by, I have to say. He's a bit of a guru in the money saving arena. So
we're going to start with?
Well, actually, before we start the next piece, I want to quickly mention about Brexit. So obviously tax returns happened on Friday, but Brexit also happened officially on Friday. So we have now left the European Union as you're listening to this podcast. There may be some people who are thinking, what does that mean for my money? Well, the short answer is nothing at the moment. So you'll see articles probably making out that lots of things are going to change and like basically selling newspapers. But this transitional period means that the rules, etc., largely nothing's changed. So the withdrawal agreement that was signed off and it was ratified in Parliament and in the European Parliament, covered only very limited things. So in the next year, and it's meant to be by the end of this year, that's what Boris Johnson wants, that we're supposedly meant to be negotiating trade agreements, agreements around fishing rights, etc. All the important stuff, basically everything to do with really leaving the European Union properly. So
I heard a good analogy. I think it might have been you that said it, that basically we're going through a bit of a separation at the moment, possibly, divorce is coming up and we're currently sleeping on the sofa. Is that right?
Yes. I was talking to Justin earlier in the office and describing the situation as Andy just said. We're splitting up, we're getting a divorce, we're just now going to be arguing for the next 10 months over who owns what and how it's going to all happen, and we're sleeping on the sofa. So we've got no say in what goes on in the household. We're on the sofa and we're going to be on it for quite a while, and it'll probably be uncomfortable because being in this transitional period, you're almost got the elements of being in the European Union without any say. Anyway, I'll move on from that now. So not a lot has changed. The other quick thing I want to ask for is a case study. Now, we are trying to push the conversation about people who don't have wills. And it's something we covered on the podcast previously, but we're trying to do something with a national newspaper that is going to show some of the stats behind the number of people who don't have a will. And a lot of this is coming from our money MOT that people do and the impact it can have on people in a positive way. But there are lots of people who don't have a will. And we need somebody out there, if they're willing to talk to a national newspaper and they would have their picture taken, to talk about a situation that would have been far easier if they'd had a will. So it may be somebody died without one and it caused problems or made the situation more difficult. And on top of being in the newspaper, we'll actually give you £100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So if you're listening to this podcast and you can help us out, it's helping promote the issue of people not having wills, and also it's good PR for Money to the Masses. If you could help us, please email me at damien@moneytothemasses.com as soon as you hear this, because if we don't get a case study, then we probably won't be able to do it. So, right, on with the show.
Yep. So moving on to the piece about leaseholds.
Yeah, so we had a message, and I've lost the person's name, I'm embarrassed to say, who said they were a big fan of a podcast and was hoping that we could do a piece on buying a property with a leasehold because they're looking to buy one. Is there some things they should look out for? Almost a checklist. So as if by magic, we're going to do a piece. And for anybody who doesn't know, you can buy property freehold, you basically own the property and the land, or you can buy a property with a leasehold. And that technically means you have exclusive possession of the property, but you don't own it. You don't own the buildings or the land. You'll end up having to pay effectively a ground rent as part of that. And you can end up paying maintenance fees as well. So it was something that's very controversial. There's been a lot of backlash about it because there have been people who've bought properties on leasehold who've been caught in a seemingly never-ending spiral of charges that they have no say over, that can increase almost, it feels like, exponentially. You just have to Google the story, you'll find plenty of people. In fact, the government took measures to ensure that new build houses will be sold on a freehold basis. So
I missed that deadline by a matter of weeks, unfortunately. I'm currently on a leasehold and all new build properties in my village now are being built on a freehold. So frustrating.
But the thing is, there are existing leaseholds. That's the thing.
Oh,
new builds, this is where the rule is relating to, but there are existing leaseholds. There's lots of them out there. And of course, until something changes, then people could end up buying a leasehold property. So what I want to do is go through some things that people need to look at if they're going to buy a leasehold property. Now, of course, you could just say, don't buy a leasehold property, buy a freehold one. That's a bit obvious, but it isn't very helpful in this instance. But the main thing you need to do is be wary of short leases. But what does that mean? How short is short? Now, if you have a lease that's less than about 80 years, then you might want to ponder whether you want to proceed. And if you do the research around it, this is a suggestion that if the lease has less than 70 years on it, it could cause an issue with mortgage lenders or estate agents anyway, and it could cause a problem. If you buy it, then subsequently you might not be able to get a mortgage, but after, even if you were, then maybe in the future it might cause a problem for a future buyer. So short leases, that does sound like actually a very long time, 70 to 80 years, but in terms of leasehold, it isn't. Now, of course, you could buy a house and try and extend the lease, but it can cost tens of thousands of pounds to do that. So there is a situation whereby somebody, if you're trying to buy a house, the current owner could extend the lease. But if that doesn't happen before you buy it, then you have to wait 2 years before you can then extend it. So there is a case that the person who owns a house might need to actually extend it themselves, because if they're trying to sell it, then you could make that suggestion. It makes the house more saleable anyway. Another general tip is something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. So if the price of the house seems particularly cheap, if it's a leasehold, then there may be issues around extending that lease. So that might be account for why it's actually slightly cheaper. But more generally, just a cheap price could be a flag about the length of the lease on the property, because when you go and look at the property, they might not tell you straight away the length of the lease that's left, so it could be a flag. One that some people may not think about is check the terms of the lease, because the leasehold could have particular exclusions. It might, for example, ban pets or subletting, which seems maybe, particularly on the pets side, a bit harsh, particularly if you feel like you're buying a property and then you're being told you can't have your prized cat or dog anymore. So it's something your solicitor needs to make sure they look at. So when you buy a house, you have a conveyancer, that solicitor needs to check all those T's and C's. Now, this is just coming from people doing research, their experiences of having these odd caveats. As I mentioned at the beginning, watch out for the ground rents that you might have to pay, and also maintenance fees. Some of these can double in terms of ground rents over 10-year periods. There was a story I remember in the national press where there was a whole estate that was built where people were almost saying they couldn't afford to pay the ground rents. They'd escalated. So you need to check how they escalate, what you're agreeing to when you buy the property.
My ground rent and maintenance fees on an old flat of mine was into the thousands. It cost a couple of grand a year.
See, that's
really, really expensive.
That is really expensive. I mean, if you think about it, you're buying a property and you're having to pay that on top, and you don't have any say about the escalation of that.
And the funny thing about that is we then had to develop amongst all the residents our own sort of community group in order to get certain things done that weren't covered by that. Things like painting the windowsills, and you would think that the maintenance charge covers everything, like including like common passageways and the grounds outside, but some things aren't covered. So for example, there was something to do with the outside of the building that wasn't covered, and we had to club together and pay several £100s to get it done outside of that, which is crazy.
So you've just there opened up another whole can of worms, almost about what you need to look at, what's included and what's not, because you might have the assumption that these sorts of things will be included, but if they're not, then you're going to have to pay. But I can only imagine that trying to get a bunch of people to agree to pay and how much each person pays, etc. is
there's animosity between certain residents because they might not be able to do it. And in our example, in terms of the window frames needed painting, well, I lived on the ground floor and I actually had French patio doors, and so they were PVC, they weren't wooden, and so I had less windows that needed to be painted than the guy upstairs who had more windows, and I ended up paying the same. I know it sounds silly, but it's little things like that can actually, you can end up falling out with people.
It's like going back to the old days of window taxes. You were being taxed almost on the windows you had, a number of wooden frames.
But it's just another example of the sort of things that aren't covered and the issues you can have with leasehold properties.
But the other one that this is one that lots of people won't realise unless you've been a leaseholder, is about buildings insurance, that you will have to pay your share of the buildings insurance. And apparently there have been cases or stories of freeholders taking kickbacks from insurance brokers for like overpriced buildings insurance. So to make that clear, the freeholder is arranging the insurance, and the leaseholders, so the people who live in the property, are having to pay their share. Well, that's open to, manipulation, isn't it? You're open to exploitation. So there have been cases of that. Now, the transaction itself could be a little bit more complicated because of all these things we're talking about when you're trying to buy the house. I mean, there are alternatives to all this stuff. So there are something called where you can have a share of a freehold. It's something slightly different. But overall, leasehold has these issues that you need to be aware of. If you get a decent solicitor, so you need to get a solicitor that's been recommended, and I would probably go and try and find somebody who is been recommended to you by somebody who's actually bought a property like this before, that's had the same issues and know what to look for, because you could end up finding that you buy a house and there are things you weren't aware of and it could cost you thousands of pounds. So it's easy for people to sit there and say, don't buy a leasehold property, but the reality is that some people might not have as much choice as they want and might end up having to buy one. If so, do be very careful and check all those T's and C's. And the other thing is, I don't see why you wouldn't go knock on the neighbour's door. See, this is maybe way out there. I've not knocked on a neighbour's door when I've moved into an area, but if I was going to buy something from a flat or an area that had a leasehold, go and knock on people in the building and say, like, is there any issues with the leasehold? Because from their point of view, I can't see why they wouldn't tell you about any issues, because it won't impact them if they did, will it? And so I think that would be a bad start. Go and ask people. Don't believe... I tell you what, I don't want to be disparaging of estate agents, but I wouldn't trust what an estate agent tells you about anything. And if Justin, I know he's in the room actually, he's sitting there, he would almost wants to yell over the back that... don't trust estate agents, as if you remember he's trying to buy a house and he's been cursing them on a daily basis.
Okay, so January is always a time of year when people take stock and look at their careers and think about perhaps alternative pathways. We're going to focus on freelancers. There's going to be lots of people out there that have considered it before or are going to consider it. And there's a few tips that we've spotted that have been inspired by a thread on Twitter. And Damien, you're going to share those.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do, Laurie, if you're out there, Laurie wrote to me on Twitter and he tagged a thread by somebody called Heather Parry. I'll read there. It's Heather Parry UK if you want to follow them on Twitter. And they are clearly a freelancer and did a thread about the issues you have as a freelancer. Well, not the issues, the things that people don't tell you when it comes to running your own tax and business before you go freelance. And they wrote a really good thread that went viral. I didn't see it until Laurie shared it and said this would make a good piece on the podcast. So I'm going to pretty much, because I've read the thread and it's very good, we're going to go through the thread, read it out almost word for word, and then we'll talk around it because I think it's a lot of good lessons in there. So Heather writes, they start off on the first one. As most of us freelancers will be scrambling to file and or pay our tax returns this week, here are some very boring pieces of advice from someone who's been doing their own for a few years now and has learned a lot of things they just entirely neglect to tell you when you are a freelancer. So off we go. At the end of your first year as a sole trader, you have to pay 100% of the tax you owe on what you made the previous year. So that means if you're a freelancer, you have what you earn in the current tax year. So if we're talking about this tax year, the 2019-20 tax year, it's January 2020, by the way, if you're listening to this podcast in the future, you don't pay tax on this current tax year that ends in April 2020 until January 2021. There's an issue with that comes down to organisation, which I'll come back to later in the thread. But you pay all of your tax as a freelancer when you do your tax return the following January. So that would be 2021. The thread goes on to say at the end of the second year, you have to pay all of that tax plus 50% of the tax you'll owe for the next, in brackets, current year. No one mentions this once because you're paying tax on a total amount of money you haven't yet earned. You have to guess. This is called making a payment on account, and you have to pay 50% on January the 31st with your other payments and 50% on July the 31st. You might be conservative in your guess. Don't be. Now, they then go on to say if you guess too low, they will charge you interest on what you should, in brackets, have paid. So you either guess too high and overpay your tax, then have to wait for HMRC to pay it back, or underguess and have them charge you interest for the difference when you finally file for that year. Now, what that means is when you get to a point where you're doing tax, so the first year, as they say, you're not paying tax until the end of that tax return. What happens is HMRC start to want their tax. They don't want to wait for it. So what they do is, if your tax equates to more than £1,000 and you earn less than 85% of your tax via PAYE, so you're employed, for example. So if you're employed, then you're going to have all your tax paid by PAYE. If more than the 85% of your tax is taken via PAYE, you don't need to worry about any of this. But if it's less, then you're going to be having to pay this money on account. And what happens...
just to clarify on that, you still have to do your tax return, but you don't have to do that payment on account.
Yeah, and what happens then is that, as the person suggests, you'll get to the point where you file your tax return, you pay money on the 31st of January, but then you need to pay an extra payment for the sort of next 6 months of tax that will be owed, rather than wait to the end of the following year and pay 100% of your tax. And in July, which is obviously 6 months later, you pay the next 50%. And when you get to the end of that tax year, then you end up having a balancing payment whereby you then work out exactly what money you owe, because you'll know then, you'll fill out your tax return, and then you either pay the balance or you get a rebate back. And as it suggests, if you get a rebate, you actually might get a bit of interest. That's happened to me, but you end up earning next to nothing. So you go through this cycle going forward where you then have to always make sure that on the 31st of January, you pay your tax that's owed, the balancing payment for that tax year in question, the previous tax year, but you've also got to pay this next bit on account. So as you go through, you need to make sure you've got that cash flow. That's the issue this person's talking about. So there's a tendency, I know there'll be people out there thinking this is obvious, but trust me, there are so many people I know who go freelance who don't realise this is how it works, because how would they? Nobody teaches you, as the thread says. There are people who go along merrily to get in money, they earn it and they spend it, and they worry about their tax bill at the end of the year. Then they realise how large their tax bill is, and they have to pay it out of money they earned that month, and so therefore they've got no money to basically feed the kids. They've also got these payments on account they have to be aware of. Now, the thread goes on to say, sometimes when you file your return, you'll log on a week later to pay and find two entirely different numbers given for what you owe. Then you ring them, that's HMRC, and they give you a third, totally different number. Pay the one they give you and get in writing to prove what they said. There are lots of things you can claim as expenses. Now, this is the interesting part. If you're a freelancer, there are expenses you can claim. For instance, if you're a writer, your expenses can include books, film tickets, travel to meetings, food for when you're traveling for events, your phone contract, a new laptop, even clothes for events. If you work from home, you can charge for a portion of your heating bills, broadband, even part of your rent, mortgage. Accurate information around these last 2 points are hard to come by, but you can find it out online. They do recommend using things like QuickBooks, which will have these figures in there. And I mean, I know, Andy, you've had experience in the past of this using accounting software where you tell it what industry you are in, and it will start to suggest the things that you can claim for, and you can put the figures in. So the point,
and it'll prorate the hours a week you work, because it's to do with the amount of hours you work if you're a home worker, and then it will give you the percentage you can claim off your household bills. And there's certain industries that you can get depreciation. So if you're in your home, if you use your home, and there are people coming into your home to work in your home, you can actually claim some depreciation on your household.
So the point is that there are expenses you can claim, but you need to look them up, and don't try and do all this on your own. You use some of this software you can get because it can help you out. And the other thing to bear in mind is the trading allowance that exists. I mean, me and Andy were talking about this before, and we've done a podcast on it, but do look it up. It's only if you earn relatively small amounts from what you do. So we're talking about under £1,000 or around that figure, that you can end up using a very simple form of basically not having to fill out a self-assessment if you earn less than £1,000. But go back and listen to the past podcast we've done on the trading allowance, but it's something to bear in mind. But if you're a freelancer earning basically a decent amount of money, it's something that won't bother you. But also to bear in mind, and Justin was talking to me about this earlier, is when you earn over £85,000, then you are going to have to be VAT registered, and that's from a 12 months rolling period. So as soon as you've had 12 months where you've gone over that 85 grand, you are going to have to be VAT registered, and it's not until you go back under that on a 12-month rolling period that you can not be VAT registered. So you need to be mindful, because obviously the taxman's not going to be very impressed if you've not been charging VAT, if you should have been charging VAT.
Another tip, I think, for people moving over from the sort of employed to self-employed world is, depending on what part of the year you do it, there's nothing, the 31st of January is just a deadline. The tax year goes from the 6th of April to the 5th of April, so there's nothing stopping you going in on the 6th of April and submitting your tax return a day after the tax year's ended. You've then got sort of 8 months to come up with the money in order to pay your tax bill, and it's sort of, you know exactly where you stand and you're kind of ahead of the game.
Yeah, so you don't have to, when you submit your tax return, when you pay isn't the day you submit your tax return. That's just when you put the papers in and they then work out how much tax you owe. So I think that's a really good tip. As we're doing this, I don't know if you can hear, there's fireworks going off in the background. We're going to carry on. I think people are celebrating us leaving Brexit. I think that's something that's going on in South London. Anyway, Andy, we'll go on. This is one of the biggest tips. If you are going to become a freelancer or whatever you're going to do, then you should have a tax account into which you pay 20% of everything you earn. Now, they say 20% because a lot of people, it will be around that basic tax rate that they're equating it to. So if you think you're in the employed world, then broadly speaking, it doesn't work exactly like this, but broadly speaking, the rules they make for people who are going to be freelance, self-employed, or whatever you want to call it, the amount of tax they pay is going to be somewhere in the region of what an employed person does. So when you get paid, you need to take a portion of your earnings, automatically take it and put it into a separate account that you do not touch. I know lots of people who have just gone and spent the money as soon as it hits their account. If you earn £500 for doing something, you have not earned £500. You have earned a portion of that because some of that is the tax man. Now, that's assuming you're going to be earning a similar amount all year long and you're actually going to be earning above the key tax threshold.
The issue is if you're putting that money aside and come the end of the year you don't need as much in order to pay your tax bill, then you've got a lovely little savings bank there, and you could either obviously spend that or do the wise thing and put that towards next year's tax bill.
Yeah, and you're going to end up having to pay national insurance as well. So the figure may vary. I mean, the broad sum of 20% is a good guide. I'd put maybe a little bit more. I'd err on the side of caution and always put too much away. There are calculators online that can help you work out how much tax you should be putting aside anyway. You can just Google them, they exist, and give you a steer roughly, but that is a good ballpark figure. But make sure it's a separate account. Don't do it into your current account because you'll be tempted to dip into it. And then when you have to pay your tax bill, whether it's the payment on account, the balancing payment, then you'll have the money there just to pay HMRC. And I think the final tip is get an accountant. Now, lots of people will try and save money by not getting an accountant. Get an accountant that you are recommended. I know there are services like Vouched For that will help you find accountants. But if you get somebody who is recommended by somebody who is in your industry, then they will understand your earnings. Now, I know there's lots of people out there who earn money in lots of different ways, but let's say, for example, you work in the world of social influence. So you may be somebody who's a YouTuber. It'd be quite nice if the people who are doing your accounts understand how your earnings are made and the different ways that you can, the sort of flows of your money, etc. And they will help you work out those payments on account, etc. So they are worth their weight in gold, accountants, because it is tricky to work out your tax sometimes, particularly as your business grows and you have lots of different maybe income streams that lots of businesses do. Then I would say definitely get an accountant who can do all of this for you. But I know in the early days you will do it yourself. Do download something like Xero, QuickBooks, or whatever it is that can help you. But hopefully tax shouldn't be taxing, as they say, and you're not put off going freelance, because for a lot of people it's a great way of having flexibility around their lifestyle. And in fact, at Money to the Masses, we even use freelancers to help do some of the stuff that we need in terms of content and writing. And on that note, that's a good segue into the fact that we are actually hiring. So if you go onto our social media, Twitter, and our newsletter this week, we have an advert out for an investment and pension writer. So if you like investments and pensions and can write about and read the advert, you could come and work at Money to the Masses Towers.
Brilliant stuff. So yeah, not just you. If you know of anyone else who doesn't listen to the podcast but you think could be the perfect candidate, then do send them the way of Money to the Masses. Right, moving on to the last piece, we've got Jordan Cox, the coupon kid, who's written an article for us about British Airways. But although this is focused on British Airways, it's more on Avios points. And these are the points that you get when you sign up for a credit card. You get a bonus offer. And also for every £1 you spend on those credit cards, you can earn Avios points, which can go towards air miles, and how best to use those air miles.
Yeah, so Avios points, it seems like one of those things that you just collect, like lots of different things in life, and you wonder what do I do with them? And you can even get them for flights. There's lots of ways, in even hotel bookings and stuff like that, you can get Avios points. And so Jordan went through and started looking at, it was a particular credit card. I can't remember, what was the credit card you looked at, Andy?
It was the British Airways American Express Premium Plus credit card.
Yeah, so at our event, he boasted, well, he didn't boast, that makes him sound arrogant, but he was saying about how he, even though he returns packets of butter because they're underweight to get money back, he flies business class, and this is essentially how he does it on the cheap. And so the Avios points you can get through credit cards like this or by any other means is the way you use them can increase their value. So Andy's going to take it away with a couple of examples just to get you to think about it. If you have Avios points, you can say to somebody, hold on, don't go and get a free flight. This is what you want to do with them.
Yeah, so the Premium Plus credit card in itself is a premium product that British Airways and Amex offer, and you have to pay a fee for that one. But don't turn off just yet. Don't think, I don't want to pay a fee, because actually it makes itself worthwhile. So you'd need to pay £195 a year to have this credit card. But by paying that £195 fee, you get 25,000 points straight off the bat.
25,000 Avios points.
Indeed. And in order to qualify for those 25,000 points, there's a qualifying spend. You need to make sure that you spend £3,000 on that credit card in the first 3 months, which for some people might be a stretch. But if you've got a big purchase coming up, or if you switch over your weekly shop and put a few other things
yeah,
on
let's
there,
be honest, £1,000 a month in 3 months isn't a big amount of spending. That could be your travel, that could be like to work, it could be your food bills. I mean, let's be honest, that most people will end up spending probably £1,000.
And the beauty is, once you spend that £3,000, you also earn the points on that £3,000 as well. And on this particular credit card, for every pound you'll spend, you'll get 1.5 Avios points. So if you manage to do that qualifying spend of £3,000 straight away for £195 fee, you'll get 29,500 Avios points. Now you're probably thinking, well, what does that mean? What does it equate to?
You're a mind reader. What does it mean? What does that equate to?
Well, this is very corny, isn't it? I'm glad you asked. So if you're looking into Europe, you can get a business class trip to Europe off peak for around about 15 to 25,000 Avios points. So your points will be pretty much eaten up quite quickly on a short haul business trip somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, but I don't get why people do short haul business trips. Because, I mean, I'm going to tell you a story now that I never told anybody this before, because it made you sound like, I don't know, a bit of a wally, really. But I don't know why I think like this. But when I was 40, I ended up, well, Justin and I, we went to New York with our wives. And on the way out there, we got upgraded. We didn't pay for it to go in business class. And so you can imagine, we went to New York. I've never been in business class in my life. I've never been to New York. And it was like how the other world lived. It was like, it was amazing. So I didn't want to get off the plane. I was getting filled with like champagne, all sorts. We would just sit there, and Justin and I I never drink on a plane. I mean, I drank on the plane this time, and the food you get with the sort of cutlery and everything like that. I could never bring myself to pay that, because it's an incredible amount of money. So to New York, you want to fly over there on a business class, it's about, £1,500. But then I get the element, you're there being almost pampered for like 7 hours. 2 hours hopping over to Europe, business class, to me just doesn't seem worth it. But by the time you've settled down, how much booze can you really drink in 2 hours? You give it a go. How much food could you eat in that time? So yeah, anyway, I digress. But long haul, I think business class is exciting.
Exactly right. So looking on the long haul, if you look at what this 30,000 Avios points might get you, you're looking at somewhere maybe in the Middle East or North Africa, so sort of medium long haul. Again, what you need to remember on this is you can use your Avios points to book these trips, business class, but you will have to pay the taxes and fees on top. Now, they can range anywhere between £50 on a short haul flight up to about £250, £300 on a longer haul flight.
Yeah, we can live with that if we're going rock star style.
Exactly. So looking at that sort of longer haul flight, you're looking off peak somewhere like North Africa. You'll be looking to pay about £180 to £250 in fees, and you'll be using up about 32,000 Avios points. So you need to spend a bit more than your qualifying.
But you're pretty much there just by taking out the card.
You're pretty much there
for one person.
So that sounds, one person, one way. So that sounds okay. But remember, £195 fee and your taxes, it's still going to cost you £400 or £500. So you've got to weigh up whether it's worth it. Now, this is where Jordan's really done his homework. homework. He says don't do that. He says it's good if you want to do that, do it. But the best use of these Avios points is to book an upgrade by using your point. And he did the research and he looked at the flight cost to New York. And you can get, unbelievably, I was quite surprised by this, you can get an off-peak economy flight to New York for around about £100. Okay, now, obviously that's amazing value. I think that's very rare you'll get that, but let's imagine you could get that.
Yeah, that's you sort of cattle class chewing on your kneecaps.
Exactly right. So what you want to do is you want to use your Avios points to get up to business class. Now, unfortunately, you can't skip classes. So that's the economy. In order to get a business class upgrade using your Avios points, you need to go from premium economy to economy. So rather than pay that £100, he looked at the prices and actually you'd need to go up one more class and pay for that ticket. So premium economy is about £170, the cheapest.
Okay, so 170 quid to New York, that's not bad. That's pretty good.
Exactly right. So, but that would cost you, that £170 trip to New York would actually cost you 26,000 Avios points.
So if I just went, I'm going to just buy a flight with my Avios points and just bought a premium economy ticket, so it's not, I'm only paying taxes, we've done 26,000 Avios points.
Yes, you pretty much
just to save myself about 100 and something quid.
Exactly. So don't do that. Jordan's saying, get on the phone, get on to British Airways website and book that trip yourself using your own cash. Pay the £165 and book the premium economy. Once that's done, get on the phone again and say, hello, I'd like to upgrade. And then what you say is, I'd like to use my Avios points to upgrade my premium economy to business class.
Now we're rocking.
Exactly right. So when you go from premium economy to business class, you're suddenly going from a £165 ticket to an £1,100 ticket. There's a £1,000 difference between those two.
Mm. But you're not paying that because you're going to pay in Avios points.
Exactly right. But you've got to remember, you're still paying the £195 credit card fee and your £200 to £300 tax. So once you take that off, the value you're getting for that Avios points is about £700.
So how many Avios points are we talking for an upgrade?
We're only talking 24,000 Avios points for the upgrade. So you're going to have change. You're going to have leftover Avios.
See, this is why I love the work that Jordan did on this piece, because what it's essentially saying is you could decide, I'm going to my 40th birthday to New York, I want to go business class, we're going to pay it, but what we're going to do is we're going to take out like this particular credit card that gives you basically a free 25,000 Avios points as long as you just use it like you would normally use a credit card. Yes, you're going to have to pay a £195 fee for the credit card that year in total. Yes, you're going to have to pay taxes on any flight, but that's going to be the case no matter what you do anyway. But you could get a premium economy ticket, add in the credit card fee that you've had to spend for that year anyway, and so that means you can get to New York
nigh on £1,200 worth of ticket.
Yeah, for about
a couple of 300 quid.
300 quid. That is awesome. Now I could see, and the reason why we did it on the podcast, the message is, if you have Avios points, if you not interested in the whole British Airways card thing that we just talked about, the thing on Avios points to remember is there's more value upgrading than buying a flight. So you could go business class for a premium economy style price, and that I think is a brilliant piece of research, and I think there'll be people listening to this who would do it, because I certainly would. And I could imagine, I'm not trying to push credit cards by any means, but I can imagine there'll be people out there who go and take out these credit cards as a couple or as individuals. I mean, they decide they're going somewhere to New York for their 40th birthday. Do you know what? Let's get credit cards out and spend some money like we normally do, and we can basically get tickets to New York business class on the way there for about 300-400 quid and enjoy the trip. Yes, there'll be an economy on the way back, but that's just life.
Yeah. Or actually, another tip is to do it on the way back, because Jordan pointed out that when you look at the cost of the flights, for some reason there's a weird quirk where the taxes to come back to England are often cheaper than the taxes you pay to go out. So that's another little tip.
So return flights are often even better value doing this than going on the way out there.
Yeah, and actually if you've had a bit of a trip and you don't really want to go back to England, then to do it in a bit of class, you know, when you're thinking about rainy old England, that's possibly the way to do it. Right.
That is it for this week. Yeah, so please do leave us a review. If you can help us out with a case study, please do so. That would be amazing.
If you know someone who would like to work at Money to the Masses, who's got expertise in writing about investments and pensions, and get in touch, Damien at moneytothemasses.com.
And a really exciting announcement, not just all of those, but keep an eye on our socials next week, because there is something very big that we are celebrating next week that I know that you would all like to see and be a part of and send in messages about. A bit cryptic, but you'll get what I'm talking about when you see it.
That's it. We're done. Loved it this week.
I did too. Yeah.
Play the music.
That was a slightly unusual.